Unit 9, World War I, aligned to the Tennessee U.S. History Standards. Our learning objectives: explain the causes of World War I. Explain the reasons for the initial declaration of U.S. neutrality. Explain the reasons for American entry into World War I. Identify and explain the impact of World War I. Big concepts: European nations, imperialist ambitions fueled military buildups, and a rise in nationalism, a devotion to country. The assassination of the future leader of Austria-Hungary, a large European empire, sparked war in Europe. Many European nations had protective alliances with each other, which dragged most of Europe into a large-scale war. New technologies forced the war to be fought in protective trenches. Under Woodrow Wilson, the United States stayed out of the conflict. German aggression and America's strong economic ties to Britain and France eventually forced the United States into war in 1917. In 1918, the Allies, with the assistance of the United States, win the war. Key vocab: the main causes of World War I. Militarism. European nations built large armies to protect themselves and their empires. Alliances. European nations signed defensive alliances with one another in case of attack. Imperialism. European nations built vast empires to fuel their economies and interests. Nationalism. European citizens began to identify and support strongly with their nations and ethnic identities, in particular in the southeastern region of Europe in the Balkans. The unstable Balkan region, many different ethnicities, many under control of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, sought independence. This leads to the assassination of Franz Ferdinand. He was the future leader of a large empire, Austria-Hungary. He's killed by Gavrilo Princip, who wanted the empire to free his people. Austria-Hungary declares war on its neighbor, Serbia, who assisted the assassins. This triggered a world war. But it's called a world war because it's a European conflict, but it also involves all of the European empires, colonies overseas. Starts in the summer of 1914. Here's a nice little picture demonstrating how the war began. One country starts attacking another. So we had Austria-Hungary declaring war on Serbia. Serbia's friend is Russia. Russia declares war on Austria-Hungary. Austria-Hungary's friend is the powerful German Empire. Germany declares war on Russia, and then Britain and France join in defense of Russia, who was their ally at the time. So here are the World War I alliances in 1914. The Triple Entente, also known as the Allies, Great Britain, France, and Russia. This will be the alliance that the United States will eventually join. And we have the Triple Alliance, also known as the Central Powers, the German Empire, Austria-Hungary. New weapons and technology. World War I is the first industrialized war. We talked a lot about industrialization. Weapons are going to be manufactured on a mass scale. New weapons, such as the machine gun, tanks, airplanes, poison gas, and long-range artillery, as well as U-boats, zeppelins, and flamethrowers. So U-boats, of course, are submarines, zeppelins are blimps, flamethrowers, and we're going to also have chemical weapons, chlorine gas and mustard gas. So this will be a horrible war. Because of these new weapons, soldiers are forced to dig trenches for defense. World War I becomes a trench war. Both sides launch attacks against each other's defenses, against each other's trenches. The attacks against these defenses lead to mass casualties. Millions are killed for very little. The war is so terrible, the United States wants to remain neutral. Wilson promises to keep the USA out of the war. Why? Well, the United States, because of immigration, it's a melting pot. Many Americans had family and connections to both sides of the alliances fighting. The war is very destructive and deadly, and American businesses wish to sell supplies and to profit from the war by selling to both sides. Reasons the United States joins World War I. One of the primary reasons was the Germans' use of U-boats, also known as submarines, sinking American and Allied shipping in the Atlantic Ocean. Wilson had a desire to defend European democracies. Britain and France were democracies fighting against Germany and Austria-Hungary, which had monarchies. The Zimmermann telegram, and the US is going to be trading far more with Britain and France than with Germany, in large part because Germany is being blockaded by Britain. German U-boats, part of the new technology of World War I. They built over 250 of these U-boats, and they were highly effective at sinking ships, merchant ships. And the Germans felt, since England is on an island, they could surround England with U-boats and prevent it from getting supplies. They could starve out England and France. So they're going to use unrestricted submarine warfare, where the submarines could sink any type of Allied ship. Total number of ships sunk by the German U-boats, 6,596. Here we have the German World War I U-boat. So they're very small compared to a modern submarine. They carried torpedoes, they had a deck gun, a diesel engine, batteries that would run it underwater. Several large passenger ships, transatlantic steamships, were sunk by German U-boats practicing unrestricted submarine warfare. And one of the more well-known of these ships was the Lusitania, which was sunk off the coast of Ireland by a German U-boat, U-20. 1,198 passengers drowned and 128 American passengers were killed. The Germans sank it, claiming that it was carrying weapons and contraband to the Allied countries, and they had warned Americans from boarding the ship by taking out ads in newspapers in the United States. But this caused a lot of outrage and turned a lot of people against Germany. Then we have the Zimmermann telegram. This was a German message to Mexico. They were hoping to get Mexico to join a secret alliance with them in case the United States declared war on Germany. Germany was going to continue its unrestricted submarine warfare after promising to stop, and they felt that this might make America declare war on them, and they wanted Mexico to attack the United States. and the Germans would provide financial support and allow Mexico to claim its lost territory in Texas and New Mexico, territory that they'd lost in the Mexican-American War. Britain intercepts this message and they decode it. It was decoded and it was given to the United States in a hope to get the United States to join Britain in the war. So by April 6, 1917, because of the events previously discussed, Wilson asks Congress to declare war on Germany in defense of democracy. And this is 3 years after the war had started. Wilson gets General John J. Pershing to be the commander of the American military force that will be sent to Europe. The American Expeditionary Force, 2 million American soldiers, and they're going to fight on the Western Front. This is the trench system that ran between France and the Germans. And the Americans will be the fresh troops. The large number of American soldiers are going to help turn the tide of the war against Germany, boost the morale of Britain and French troops, and lead to the eventual defeat of the Central Powers. Some of the most decorated American fighting units in World War I were actually African American fighting forces. They fought in segregated units, and in the case of the Harlem Hellfighters, they fought alongside French units, and they fought heroically despite the issues back in the United States involving things we've talked about in class segregation and racism. They were outstanding soldiers. The most famous American war hero from this war is Alvin York. Alvin York is from Fentress County in the northeastern part of Tennessee, and he will become the most decorated American war hero. He was drafted to fight, and he's very religious, and he didn't want to go fight. He was thinking about being a conscientious objector to the war. Ultimately, he decides to fulfill his draft orders, and he goes to war. And while fighting on the Western Front, he kills 25 German soldiers, captures over 132 other German soldiers. He'll return a war hero. We have a future president involved with World War I. We're going to have Herbert Hoover. He'll be president towards the end of the 1920s. A lot of Europeans, especially in Belgium, which was occupied by Germany, were starving. A lot of Russians were starving. Herbert Hoover is going to run the American Relief Administration, providing food and supplies to the destroyed European nations involved in World War I. And here's our timeline. It all starts in 1914 with Franz Ferdinand, the future leader of Austria-Hungary, being assassinated. That's the spark that starts the war. Immediately, Wilson declares American neutrality. 1915, the Lusitania is sunk. 1917, Russia leaves the war. They have the Russian Revolution. Again, the Bolsheviks lead a revolution against the Russian king. And so Russia leaves the war. And this kind of opens the way for Wilson to feel more comfortable joining the Allies to support democratic countries. We also the British intercept the Zimmerman telegram and give it to the United States. So in April 1917, the United States declares war on Germany. And in 1918, American troops arrive in Europe. And so our next unit will be about the American war effort and what happens following the end of World War I.